The scent of too many white lilies hung heavy in the air, a cloying, funeral sweetness that made Henry Pendleton's stomach turn. They were Helen's favorite, his late wife. He'd suggested a simple bouquet for their son, Michael's, service, but his daughter-in-law had overruled him with a wave of a perfectly manicured hand. "Don't worry about the arrangements, Henry," Cassandra had said, her voice a low, controlled purr that brooked no argument. "I'll handle everything." What she'd really meant was, "Stay out of my way." Now, standing in the receiving line of his own home, the house he had built with his own hands in the spring of 1989, Henry felt like a ghost in his own life. He watched Cassandra, a sleek column in a designer black dress that probably cost more than his first car, command the room. She accepted condolences with a graceful, tragic tilt of her head, her grip on the narrative of the day as firm as her grip on the elbows of the mourners she guided past the casket. Henry, in his one good suit, the same one he'd worn to Helen's funeral 2 years prior, felt invisible. The world had narrowed to the crushing weight in his chest and the polished, hollow echo of Cassandra's voice. He'd tried, earlier at the funeral home, to suggest a song. "Michael always loved American Pie. We used to sing it at the top of our lungs when we were building the back deck." Cassandra had cut him off, her smile thin and sharp. "That's a bit maudlin, Henry. We need something more uplifting, something that celebrates his life." And so a bland, inoffensive string quartet had played, and Henry had felt another piece of his son's memory sanded down, polished into something acceptable for Cassandra's curated grief. The final guests were leaving, their murmured sympathies fading into the twilight. The house, usually a sanctuary of quiet memories, felt violated by the lingering scent of flowers and perfume. Henry stood by the grand fireplace, his hand resting on the mantel where a photograph of Helen, Michael, and himself, taken on a long-ago fishing trip, used to sit. It was gone now, boxed away with the rest of his past. Cassandra found him there. The performative sorrow had vanished from her face, replaced with a cool, business-like efficiency. "Henry, we need to talk about your situation," she began, not bothering with preamble. "My situation?" he asked, his voice raspy from disuse. "Your financial situation," she clarified, as if speaking to a child. "You've been financially dependent on Michael. We both know that. And with him gone, well, I can't carry that burden." The word burden landed like a physical blow. It was a cold, hard stone dropped into the churning sea of his grief. "I've been more than generous letting you stay here," she continued, her eyes scanning the high ceilings and the custom bookshelves he'd built. "But this house is mine now. Everything is mine. Michael left it all to me." Henry simply nodded, a slow, weary dip of his head. He saw the flicker of triumph in her eyes. She mistook his silence for surrender, his exhaustion for defeat. What she didn't see was the slow, deliberate click of gears turning in his mind, the awakening of a part of him that had been dormant since Helen's passing. She had no idea that Michael never owned this house. He'd lived here his whole life, yes. He'd grown up within these walls, learned to walk on these oak floors, and helped his father shingle the roof once during summer. But owned it? Never. She also didn't know about the fireproof filing cabinet in the basement, a 4-drawer sentinel of a man's entire financial history, meticulously organized and dating back nearly half a century. The certified public accountant in Henry never threw anything away. Most importantly, she was blissfully, arrogantly unaware of the Pendleton Family Trust. But he was getting ahead of himself. The guests had seen what Cassandra wanted them to see: a successful, ambitious interior designer, the grieving widows stepping up to manage a difficult family transition, and a doddering old man lost without his son to guide him. "Henry's having a hard time adjusting," he'd heard her tell their neighbor, old Mrs. Gable, who had known Henry since he broke ground on this very lot. "The poor man doesn't understand finances. Michael handled everything for him." Mrs. Gable had shot him a sympathetic look, but even she, a friend of 40 years, seemed to buy into Cassandra's narrative. That was the moment Henry understood a fundamental truth. People see what they expect to see. Cassandra expected to see a helpless, dependent old man So that's what she saw. His decade-old Volvo station wagon, his simple, functional clothing, his quiet, understated grief. She mistook it all for incompetence. She confused humility with helplessness, silence with weakness, and generosity with desperation. It was an understandable, if unforgivable, miscalculation. He'd spent the 2 years since Helen's death living a stripped-down, simple life. What was the point of flashy cars and expensive suits when the center of your universe was gone? Michael had understood that. He'd respected his father's choice. But Cassandra measured a person's worth by their visibility, their volume, their control over a room. She was about to learn that the most dangerous person is the one who has nothing left to prove. As the last car pulled away, she cornered him by the front door, her earlier pronouncement now a formal decree. "I meant what I said, Henry. This arrangement isn't working anymore." Henry looked past her, through the archway into the living room. He saw the bay window he and Michael had framed together, the boy's small hand steadying the wood while his father hammered. He saw the hallway where they'd measured Michael's height every birthday, pencil marks still faintly visible on the doorframe if you knew where to look. "I understand," he said, his voice barely a whisper. But Cassandra had no idea what he understood, and she certainly had no inkling of the storm that was gathering. The morning after the funeral brought a grim clarity. Henry sat at the heavy, scarred kitchen table, a find from a flea market in the summer of '88 that he and Helen had lovingly refinished, and made a list, not of what he was losing, but of what Cassandra thought she was gaining. 1. The house. 2,500 square feet of memories on Sycamore Lane. Current market value, according to Cassandra's own boasts to her friends, $450,000. 2. The life insurance. Michael's policy through his architectural firm, $200,000. I'd seen the gleam in her eye when she'd mentioned it to her sister. She was already mentally spending it. 3. The contents. Everything from Helen's prized porcelain collection to Michael's childhood model airplanes. Worthless to an appraiser, priceless to him. 4. His dignity. This was the one that stung the most, watching her parade through his home, through his life, as if she were the queen and he a forgotten courtier. But the true injury was deeper than the material loss. It was the erasure. Cassandra was systematically wiping away every trace of the life Henry and Helen had built. Helen's gardening hats were gone from the hook by the back door. Michael's elementary school art projects had vanished from the refrigerator. Even Henry's old CPA license, framed and hanging in the den, was nowhere to be found. "I'm redecorating," she'd said airily when he'd asked for a particular photo of Helen. Michael always said this place was stuck in a time warp. Updating, as if 40 years of love, laughter, and loss were simply an outdated design trend. She had given him 30 days. 30 days to find somewhere else to live on what she assumed was his meager Social Security. 30 days to pack up a lifetime and pretend it had never happened. The sheer, breathtaking cruelty of it was that she was doing it all with such unshakable confidence, such certainty that she held all the power. That afternoon she had presented him with a printed timeline, a cold corporate eviction notice. "See, Henry, November 20th, she'd said, tapping a date circled in aggressive red ink. "That gives you plenty of time to find a suitable senior community. I've already done some research for you." She'd pulled out glossy brochures for places like Golden Years Haven and Autumn Leaves Assisted Living, her tone implying she was performing a great charity. "The one on Elm Street is only $850 a month for a studio," she had said, her voice dripping with false benevolence. $850? Henry repeated, letting a note of worry creep into his tone. "What about food? My medications? Transportation?" She shrugged, a gesture of supreme indifference. "There are government programs for people in your situation, Henry. Food stamps, Medicaid. The state provides for its elderly." The state. She had relegated him to a statistic, a problem for the bureaucracy to solve.
That was the moment the last vestige of paternal feeling toward her evaporated. She didn't just want him gone. She wanted him to be grateful for his exile. She wanted him to thank her for her generosity in not throwing him out on the street immediately. But sitting at his kitchen table that Wednesday morning, the list before him, Henry had a different, clarifying realization. Cassandra's entire edifice was built on one critical, flawed assumption, that Michael owned everything. She had been married to him for 9 years. She had lived in this house for 9 years. She probably had never seen a deed, a mortgage statement, or a tax bill. Why would she? Michael handles the finances, she'd often say. An old-fashioned dynamic, perhaps, but it had worked for them. Except Michael had never handled Henry's finances. He'd been a good son, helpful, present, running errands, driving Henry to appointments after Helen died. But the money, the investments, the property, that had always and remained Henry's domain. Cassandra had seen Michael's helpfulness and assumed dependency. She had seen Henry's gratitude and assumed obligation. She had seen his quiet grief and assumed defeat.
If he said nothing, if he simply packed his bags and shuffled off to Golden Year's Haven, what would that teach her? That cruelty wins? That volume trumps truth? That you can steal a man's life if you're loud and confident enough? That the 40 years he'd shared with Helen, the son they'd raised, the home they'd built from the ground up, meant nothing? The stakes were not merely financial, they were existential. But he held the keys. He had something Cassandra knew nothing about, a truth that would shatter her carefully constructed world. He just needed to find the right moment to reveal it. That moment arrived sooner than he expected. Thursday morning, Cassandra let herself in with Michael's key. No knock, no greeting. Henry was finishing his toast when she marched into the kitchen, a leather-bound folio under her arm. "Henry, we need to have a serious discussion," she announced, pulling out a chair without an invitation. "About your finances." She opened the folio to reveal a yellow deagle pad filled with her looping script. "I've been thinking about your situation," she said, the word dripping with condescension, "and I need to understand exactly what Michael was covering for you." Henry took a slow sip of his tea. Such as the utilities, the property taxes, the home insurance. Michael never gave me the exact figures, but I need to know so I can budget. Budget for what? For taking over those payments, obviously. Until you move out, I'll have to cover everything Michael was covering for you. Henry set his teacup down with a soft click. "And what exactly do you think Michael was covering?" "Everything, Henry. The mortgage, the taxes, the electric bill. You're on a fixed income. Social Security doesn't stretch that far." "Is that what Michael told you?" Her pen stilled. "What do you mean?" "I mean, did Michael specifically tell you he was paying my bills?" "He didn't have to," she said, a flash of irritation in her eyes. She gestured around the room. "How else could you afford to live here? This house is worth nearly $500,000. "And how do you know what it's worth?" "I'm an interior designer, Henry. I know property values in this neighborhood." "But you've never seen the deed." The question hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Cassandra's confident mask slipped for a fraction of a second. "I don't need to see the deed. Michael inherited this house when your wife died." "Did he?" "Of course he did. Who else would get it?" Henry stood up slowly and walked to the sink, deliberately rinsing his cup. "You know, Cassandra, you've made a lot of assumptions about my finances." "They're not assumptions, they're facts." "Really, what other facts do you have?" She consulted her legal pad. "Michael told me you never contributed a dime to this house." Henry turned around, leaning against the counter. "Is that what Michael told you?" "Yes." "Interesting, because I built this house in 1989, paid cash for the land, hired the crew, was here every single day of the construction." Cassandra's face tightened. "That was 35 years ago. Things change." "Some things," Henry said quietly, "not ownership." "Look, Henry," she said, standing up, her composure cracking, "I know this is hard for you, losing Michael, having to face reality about your financial situation, but denial won't help." "What denial?" The denial that you're not dependent on family charity. The word charity was her favorite weapon, and she wielded it with precision. Henry dried his hands on a towel, taking his time. Cassandra, let me ask you something. In 9 years of marriage, did Michael ever show you a mortgage statement? We kept our finances separate. Did he ever mention making a house payment? We didn't discuss every detail of his expenses. Did you ever see him write a check for the property taxes? Her silence was more eloquent than any confession. Here's what I think happened, Henry said, his voice calm and even. Michael helped me around the house. He picked up groceries, mowed the lawn, fixed a leaky faucet. And you assumed that meant he was supporting me financially because that's what it looked like from the outside. Appearances can be deceiving. Cassandra stood, gathering her papers, her frustration palpable. Fine, then show me the deed. Prove you own this house.
I don't have to prove anything to you. Yes, you do, because I am Michael's widow, and I inherited everything he owned. Did you? Stop answering questions with questions. Stop playing games. They stared at each other across the kitchen, a chasm of misunderstanding and resentment between them. You have until November 20th, she said finally, her voice cold. After that, I'm changing the locks. We'll see about that, Henry said, a faint smile touching his lips. We'll see about what? But he simply turned and began loading the dishwasher. Some conversations, he knew, were best finished with lawyers present. Friday afternoon, Henry descended the creaking wooden stairs into the basement. This was his domain, his archive. Helen had always teased him about his squirrel-like tendencies, his compulsion to save every document. You never know when you'll need proof of something, Helen, he'd tell her. She'd laugh and say normal people didn't keep 45 years of bank statements. But Henry was a CPA. He knew that paper trails told stories, and stories had power. The 4-drawer filing cabinet stood against the far wall, a monument to a life of order and diligence. Each drawer was labeled by decade. He started with the bottom one, 1980s. Inside, he found the folder he sought. Real estate, 181 Sycamore Lane. The first document was the original land purchase agreement, February 14th, 1989. Henry Pendleton buyer, $50,000 for the 1.5-acre lot. The second was the construction contract with Pendleton and Sons Builders. A coincidence of names, no relation. $95,000 for a custom-built colonial. The third document was the linchpin, the original deed, recorded April 10th, 1989. Owner, Henry Pendleton. No co-signers, no joint ownership, no mortgage. He had paid cash for it all. Cassandra had been a child in 1989. She had no concept of the sweat and sacrifice these papers represented. But there was more, much more. Insurance policies, property tax receipts, utility connection agreements, all in his name, all paid from his accounts. A continuous, unbroken chain of ownership spanning 35 years. Michael's name was conspicuously absent from every single one. He moved through the other drawers, the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, each one telling the same story of steady, solitary ownership. The real revelation, however, was in a separate lockbox in the bottom drawer. Inside was a folder labeled Pendleton Family Trust, Confidential. This was the truth Cassandra could not imagine. The first document was a trust agreement, dated September 3rd, 1987, before Michael was even a year old. The Henry and Helen Pendleton Family Trust. The second was a recent bank statement from First Merchants Bank. Current balance, $925,678.41. The third was the list of trust beneficiaries. Michael was listed, yes, but as a lifetime beneficiary with specific terms and conditions, terms Cassandra had never bothered to inquire about. The trust was complex, as these instruments are, but its essence was simple. Henry and Helen were the original trustees. Upon Helen's death, Henry became the sole trustee. Michael received monthly disbursements for education, housing, and family support, but ownership of the assets, the house, the investments, always remained with the trust, which meant it remained with Henry. Michael had lived a comfortable, successful life because his father had insured it. The architecture degree, the wedding, the seed money for his first independent project, it had all flowed from this trust. Cassandra had seen Michael's success and assumed it was self-made. She'd seen his generosity towards his father and assumed it was born of his own earnings. She never dreamed the money flowing from Michael to Henry was in fact Henry's own money, circulating back to its source. It was a profound and ultimately tragic misunderstanding. And then there was the final document in the folder, Michael's life insurance policy. $200,000, just like she'd said, but the beneficiary wasn't Cassandra. The beneficiary was the Henry and Helen Pendleton Family Trust. The beneficiary was Henry. Cassandra had been making plans, spending money in her mind, building a future on a foundation that simply did not exist. He closed the filing cabinet, the metallic thud echoing in the quiet basement. Back in the kitchen, he made himself a simple lunch and considered his next move. Cassandra had given him until November 20th. Today was November 1st. He had time. He could call her now, lay out the documents, watch her world implode, or he could wait. Let her continue to operate in her fantasy, let her dig the hole a little deeper, let her learn the hardest of lessons. He remembered an old client, a shrewd businessman, once telling him, "Henry, the best deal is often the one where you let the other party negotiate themselves into a corner." Cassandra was certainly doing that. The question was, how deep did he want the corner to be?
He looked around at the kitchen. The cabinets he'd sanded and stained, the countertops he'd sealed, the window over the sink that framed the oak tree he and Michael had planted as a sapling. My house, my trust, my choice. Cassandra was about to learn that respect is not a conditional privilege. It is a fundamental requirement. But first, she needed to finish digging. Sunday morning, Henry was preparing for his weekly visit to Helen's grave when Cassandra arrived with an entourage. He recognized two of them as colleagues from her design firm. They swept into the house without ceremony. "The potential here is insane," Cassandra was saying, her voice echoing in the foyer. "But God, it's like a time capsule. We'll have to gut the kitchen, obviously." They moved through the rooms like a tour group in a museum. "Cassandra, these hardwood floors are magnificent," a woman with severe black glasses exclaimed. Original from '89. Henry built the place, but he has zero design sense. "Look at this wallpaper. And that furniture? It's a relic." Henry stood at the top of the stairs, listening to them dissect his life. "The bones are incredible," said another, "but it needs a complete overhaul." "Already planned," said Cassandra. "Henry will be moving to Golden Years Haven soon, so I'll have free reign." Free reign in his kitchen, the one where Helen had taught Michael to bake cookies. He came down the stairs, his presence causing a momentary hush. "Henry," Cassandra's voice was artificially bright. "Perfect timing. These are my colleagues, Sophia and Isabel." The women offered tight, professional smiles. "Mr. Pendleton, your home has such character." "Thank you," Henry said. "Cassandra tells us you're moving to Golden Years Haven. That's a lovely facility." Henry looked at Cassandra. "Is that what I'm doing?" "We discussed this, Henry. November 20th, remember?" "I remember you discussing it." An uncomfortable silence fell. The colleagues exchanged glances. "Well," Sophia said, "we should probably let you get on with your day." "Actually," Cassandra interjected, "while everyone's here, maybe you could tell them about the maintenance issues, Henry. The plumbing problems, the drafty windows." There were no such issues. The plumbing had been updated 5 years ago. The windows were all 3-paned and modern. "I'm not aware of any maintenance issues," Henry said carefully. "Henry, you know the guest bathroom sink has been dripping for months and the attic insulation is shot. The sink needed a new washer, a 5-minute job. The attic was perfectly insulated." "Henry's very attached to this place," she said to her friends, her smile strained. "Sometimes he doesn't see the problems that are obvious to others." "Problems like what?" Henry asked. "Like the fact that you can't afford to maintain the house this size anymore." Room went utterly silent. "Can't afford it?" Henry repeated. "Tom, we've been through this. Your Social Security barely covers your living expenses. And you know this how?"
Because I'm not blind, Henry. You drive a car that's older than some of my clients. You clip coupons. You haven't updated a single thing in this house in 20 years. One of the colleagues cleared her throat. Cassandra, maybe we should... No, it's fine, Cassandra snapped. Henry understands the situation. He's had 2 years to adjust to reality since Helen died. What reality is that? Henry's voice was dangerously quiet. That you're a 72-year-old man on a fixed income who can't handle a 2,500-square-foot house anymore. 73. And the point is, you're making assumptions about my finances. They're not assumptions, Henry. They're observations. Observations about the fact that you've been living off Michael's generosity for years, and now that he's gone, you need to face facts.
The words, loud and sharp, hung in the air. Sophia and Isabel looked mortified. Michael's generosity? Henry repeated. Yes, Michael paid your property taxes. Michael covered your utilities. Michael made sure you had food on the table and your pills in the cabinet. Did he? You know he did. And you know this because? Because I was married to him. I saw him managing your affairs. What affairs? Did you see him write checks to the county for property taxes? He handled things online. Did you see him pay my electric bill? He transferred money to your account. Did you ever see bank statements proving these transfers? We kept our finances separate, so you never actually saw any of these payments. Sophia stepped forward. Cassandra, this is clearly a private matter. We're going to go. No, Cassandra said, her voice sharp as broken glass. This needs to be said. Henry, you cannot keep living in denial about your financial situation. What denial? The denial that you're anything other than a burden. The word, once again, echoed through the room. Even Cassandra seemed momentarily stunned by her own venom. A burden, Henry said, his voice so quiet they had to lean in to hear it. I'm sorry, but yes, you are a burden. You have been since Helen died. Michael was too kind to say it, but someone has to. Too kind to say what? That supporting you was draining him. Draining him. The property taxes alone are over $9,000 a year. Add in utilities, maintenance, your medical copays. Michael spent $50,000 last year just keeping you afloat. $50,000. And now he's gone, and I'm supposed to pick up that burden? I have my own life to think about. The colleagues were now actively retreating toward the foyer. So you're throwing me out, Henry stated. I'm giving you a month to find appropriate housing. That's more generous than most people would be. Generous? Yes, generous, because frankly, Henry, you never contributed anything to Michael's success. He built his own life, earned his own money, bought his own house. This house. Yes, this house. Michael inherited it from Helen, and now I inherit it from him. That's how the world works. I see. Good, finally. Cassandra, he said, his gaze shifting to include the two horrified witnesses, you might want to check your facts before making statements like that in front of an audience. She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. What facts, Henry? I'm a professional. I know how property ownership works. Do you? Better than I do, apparently. He looked at Sophia and Isabel. Ladies, you might want to ask Cassandra to show you the deed to this house before you invest any more of your time planning its renovation. Cassandra's face went from flushed to ashen. Henry, don't you dare. Don't what? Don't tell the truth? He had said enough. The seeds were planted. He turned his back on her sputtering fury. Enjoy your tour, he said over his shoulder, and walked out the front door. He had a lawyer to see.
Monday morning found Henry in the spacious, wood-paneled office of his attorney, Eleanor Vance. 3 thick manila folders lay on the desk between them. Eleanor, a sharp, perceptive woman in her 60s, had handled Henry's legal affairs for over 20 years. She knew the contents of those folders intimately. "Henry," she began, adjusting her reading glasses, "I need to ask, are you absolutely certain you want to proceed down this path?" "I've never been more certain, Eleanor." "Because once we begin, there's no going back. Cassandra will know everything." "Good." Eleanor opened the first folder. Let's review. The deed to 181 Sycamore Lane. Henry Pendleton, sole owner, recorded April 10th, 1989. No co-signers, no joint ownership, no mortgage. You paid cash. Correct.
She opened the second folder. Property tax records for 35 years, all paid by Henry Pendleton from his personal and trust accounts. Correct. Insurance, utilities, maintenance contracts, all in your name. Correct. She opened the third folder. And this is the cornerstone, the Henry and Helen Pendleton Family Trust. She sifted through the dense pages. Current balance? $925,678.41 as of last Friday. And Michael's status? Beneficiary during his lifetime, never a trustee, never an owner. Eleanor leaned back, steepling her fingers. "Henry, this is a substantial estate. Cassandra truly had no idea? None. And Michael, God bless him, was never one for financial details. He knew the trust provided for him when he needed it. He probably never felt the need to explain its mechanics to Cassandra. So she saw him helping you and assumed the support was flowing in the opposite direction." "Precisely. The irony is profound," Eleanor said. "She's been threatening to evict you from your own house, using your own money as leverage." "How so?" "The life insurance, the $200,000, she's been counting on it for 2 months. But the beneficiary is the trust, which means it comes to you." Eleanor pulled a calculator from her desk drawer. "So let me be perfectly clear. Cassandra believes she inherited a $450,000 house and $200,000 in cash." "That's correct. And in reality, she inherited nothing. The house belongs to you, the insurance money belongs to your trust." "Yes. And she has been treating you as a charity case while planning to spend $750,000 that were never hers?" "Yes." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "Henry, why did you wait? Why let this charade continue for 2 months?" Henry thought of the scene in his living room, Cassandra calling him a burden in front of her colleagues. "I wanted to see the full measure of her character, and I saw it. What do you want to do now?" "I want to establish boundaries, legal, financial, and personal." "Talk to me." "First, I want the insurance claim processed immediately. That money is an asset of the trust." "Done. That's straightforward." "Second, I want Cassandra served with a formal notice. She is a tenant at will in my house, not the owner. She has 30 days to vacate." Eleanor allowed a small smile. "The same time frame she gave you. Poetic." "Third, I want a full, documented accounting of Michael's relationship to the trust provided to her, so there can be no claim of misunderstanding later." "Easily arranged." "And fourth," Henry paused, "I want witnesses present when the truth is delivered." "Witnesses?" "The same colleagues who heard her vilify me. They should hear the correction." Eleanor set down her pen. "Henry, that feels punitive, like public shaming." "No," Henry corrected gently. "Public shaming is what she did to me. This is public accountability. There is a difference. She humiliated me to elevate herself. I am setting the record straight to prevent future misinterpretations." Eleanor considered this. "The colleagues aren't necessary for the legal process, but they are necessary for the social one. She spent 2 months telling people I was a broke, helpless old man. Those people deserve to know the truth. And Cassandra deserves to hear it in the same form she used to spread her fiction." "I see," Eleanor said, making a note. "When?" "Tomorrow. Give her 24 more hours to enjoy her fantasy.
If she refuses to meet, we serve the papers at her office and let her piece it together herself. Eleanor consulted her calendar. I can have everything prepared by 10 a.m. tomorrow. Perfect. And where would you like to meet? At her design studio. Let her colleagues see what real strength looks like. Eleanor looked up, her expression unreadable. Henry, in 30 years of practice, I've seen countless family disputes. This isn't really about the money, is it? No, Henry said softly. It's about the disrespect. It's about boundaries. She needs to learn that you cannot treat people as disposable simply because you assume they are powerless. Had she come to me with kindness, with questions instead of demands, we would be having a very different conversation. I would have helped her. I would have given her time, perhaps even financial assistance to get on her feet. We could have honored Michael's memory together, but she chose cruelty. There's a vast chasm between grief and cruelty. Eleanor closed the folders. I'll make the calls this afternoon. Thank you, Eleanor. For what it's worth, I think Michael would have approved of how you're handling this. Henry stood and shook her hand. Michael taught me something important in the way he lived his life. What's that? That quiet integrity will, always eventually, drown out loud arrogance. As he left the office, he thought of Cassandra's timeline. November 20th. Tomorrow was November 5th. She was about to learn that some deadlines are double-edged swords, and some assumptions carry a price tag far higher than one can afford. The quiet man was about to speak, and when a quiet man finally decides to use his voice, wise people listen. Cassandra was about to discover just how wise she really wasn't.
Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. sharp, Henry Pendleton and Eleanor Vance walked through the glass doors of Cassandra Croft Design. The space was all minimalist chic, white walls, polished concrete floors, and expensive-looking orchids. Cassandra was at her sleek white desk, presenting fabric swatches to a wealthy-looking older couple. She looked up, and her professionally pleasant expression froze, then curdled into a mix of confusion and dread. "Henry, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," Henry said, his voice calm and even. "Privately." "I'm with clients," she said, her agent's smile straining at the edges. "I'm afraid this can't wait," Eleanor said, stepping forward. "I'm Eleanor Vance, of Vance & Associates. We have urgent legal matters to discuss regarding the estate of your late husband, Michael Pendleton." The words legal matters and estate had an immediate chilling effect. The clients exchanged a glance. "Perhaps we should reschedule," the man said, already standing. "No, it's fine," Cassandra said quickly, her voice tight. "Henry, just wait in the conference room. I'll be right there." "Actually," Eleanor interjected, her voice carrying across the open-plan office, "I think it would be best if your colleagues joined us. There seem to be some widespread misconceptions that need correcting." Cassandra's face went pale. "My colleagues?" "The two ladies from Sunday. I believe they're under the impression they'll be working on a property you own." Around the studio, the gentle hum of activity ceased. Designers and assistants pretended to be engrossed in their screens, but every ear was tuned to the unfolding drama. "What is this about?" Cassandra's voice was a sharp whisper. "It's about the house," Henry said simply. "We already discussed the house." "No," Henry corrected. "You discussed the house. I listened." The client couple was now making a swift, polite retreat. "We'll call to reschedule," the woman murmured, not making eye contact. "Wait," Cassandra called after them, but they were already through the door. Sophia, the colleague with the black glasses, approached cautiously. "Cassandra, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Cassandra said, her jaw clenched. "Henry is just having trouble accepting that he needs to move." "On the contrary," Eleanor said, opening her briefcase, "I think it would be best if your colleagues joined us. There seem to be some widespread misconceptions that need correcting." Cassandra's face went pale. "My colleagues?" "The two ladies from Sunday. I believe they're under the impression they'll be working on a property you own." Around the studio, the gentle hum of activity ceased. Designers and assistants pretended to be engrossed in their screens, but every ear was tuned to the unfolding drama. "What is this about?" Cassandra's voice was a sharp whisper. "It's about the house," Henry said simply. "We already discussed the house." "No," Henry corrected. "You discussed the house. I listened." The client couple was now making a swift, polite retreat. "We'll call to reschedule," the woman murmured, not making eye contact. "Wait!" Cassandra called after them, but they were already through the door. Sophia, the colleague with the black glasses, approached cautiously. "Cassandra, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Cassandra said, her jaw clenched. "Henry is just having trouble accepting that he needs to move." "On the contrary," Eleanor said, opening her briefcase, "I think it would be best if your colleagues joined us. There seem to be some widespread misconceptions that need correcting." Cassandra's face went pale. "What does that mean?" Cassandra snapped. Eleanor pulled out the first folder. "It means we need to clarify some fundamental errors regarding property ownership." "There are no errors. I inherited Michael's house." "What house would that be?" 181 Sycamore Lane. "And you have documentation of this inheritance?" "Michael's will left all his worldly possessions to me. Yes, his car, his watch, his personal effects, and his house." Michael didn't own a house. The statement landed in the silent studio with the force of a physical blow. You could have heard a pin drop. "What do you mean he didn't own a house?" Cassandra's voice was barely a whisper. Eleanor placed the deed on Cassandra's white desk. 181 Sycamore Lane is owned by Henry Pendleton. Purchased April 10, 1989. No cosigners, no joint ownership, no mortgage. "That's impossible." Cassandra snatched the paper, her eyes scanning it frantically. "This has to be a fake. Michael inherited it when Helen died." "Helen Pendleton owned no property," Eleanor stated calmly. "All assets were held in Henry's name or within the trust prior to their marriage." "But Michael paid all the bills, the taxes, the insurance, everything." "No," Henry said, quiet but clear. "Michael helped me. I paid all the bills." "That's not true."
Eleanor opened the second folder. Property tax records. For 35 years. She began laying them out, one by one, on the desk. All paid by Henry Pendleton. Homeowner's insurance. More documents. All in Henry Pendleton's name. Utility bills, maintenance records, bank statements. All Henry Pendleton. Cassandra stared at the growing pile of paper as if it were a snake about to strike. This doesn't make any sense. Michael had money. He was a successful architect. Henry was comfortable because Henry made sure he was comfortable, Eleanor said. What does that mean? Eleanor opened the third folder, the thickest one. The Henry and Helen Pendleton Family Trust. Current balance, $925,678.41. A soft collective gasp went through the studio. Michael was a beneficiary of the trust during his lifetime. Henry provided financial support for Michael's education, his wedding, his various ventures. The comfortable life you shared was funded by Henry's lifelong work and planning. You're saying Henry was supporting Michael? I'm saying Henry was supporting his son from his own substantial resources. Cassandra sank into her desk chair, the fight draining out of her. The studio was a tableau of stunned silence. "The life insurance," she said suddenly, a last desperate hope. "Michael's life insurance, that's mine. $200,000. Eleanor pulled out the final document. The beneficiary of Michael Pendleton's life insurance policy is the Henry and Helen Pendleton Family Trust. No. Yes.
That money belongs to the trust. It belongs to Henry. Cassandra looked around the room. Every one of her colleagues was staring at her, the woman who had been so confident, so condescending, so cruelly certain of her position, the woman who had called a millionaire a burden. Henry, I didn't know. You didn't ask. You could have told me. You could have asked with respect. Eleanor closed the folders with a definitive snap. Cassandra, you have 30 days to vacate the premises at 1801 Sycamore Lane. 30 days? But where will I go? That is not Henry's concern. You are an employed adult. I'm sure you'll manage. Cassandra looked at Henry, and for the first time he saw not anger or arrogance, but a dawning, horrified respect. Henry, I'm so sorry. I made terrible assumptions. Yes, you did. Can we work something out? Some arrangement? Henry let the question hang in the air, letting the silence of the studio press in on her. Cassandra, respect isn't negotiable. It never was. I understand that now. Do you? Yes. Good. That's the first step to earning it back. Eleanor placed a formal, sealed envelope on the desk. Your 30-day notice. We will expect the keys on December 5th. With that, Henry and Eleanor walked out of the studio, leaving behind a silence that was more eloquent than any outburst. The quiet man had spoken, and the echoes would reverberate for a long, long time. The fallout was swift and merciless. By Thursday, the story was the talk of the local design community and beyond. Henry heard it from his neighbor, Mr. Peterson, who'd heard it from his wife, who played bridge with a woman whose daughter worked at a rival firm. She's a pariah, Henry, said Mr. Peterson, sipping the lemonade Henry had offered on the back porch. Apparently, 2 of her biggest clients dropped her yesterday. Who wants to work with someone who doesn't even understand who owns the house she's been living in for a decade? Henry simply nodded. The natural consequences were unfolding exactly as he'd known they would. Trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild. On Friday, Eleanor called. Developments, she said. Victoria has retained counsel. Already? His name is Robert Gable. He called this morning to discuss a settlement. What kind of settlement? She wants to stay on the house for 6 months. She's offering to pay rent. How much? She proposed $2,200 a month. For a $450,000 house, market rent is at least $3,500. Precisely. I told him we would consider reasonable offers. And what's reasonable? $3,500. First and last month's rent plus a security deposit of 1 month. So, $10,500 due upon signing the lease. Can she afford that? That is not our problem to solve, Henry. If she wants to be a tenant, she can pay market rates like any other tenant. After he hung up, Henry felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't vindictiveness. It was the satisfaction of an equation finely balanced. The final visit came on a crisp Saturday morning, a week later. Henry was raking leaves in the front yard when a familiar sedan pulled up. Cassandra got out, looking thinner, older. The confident swagger was gone. Henry, she said, her voice hesitant. Henry, I'm moving out next weekend. I see. I found some of Michael's things I thought you should have. She handed him a cardboard box. Inside were photo albums, Michael's old baseball glove, a stack of childhood drawings, artifacts of a life she had tried to erase. Thank you, Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. She looked at the house, her gaze lingering on the familiar lines. It looks the same. Why would it change? I don't know. I guess I thought you might change everything after. Some things, Henry said, are worth preserving. They stood in an uncomfortable silence for a moment. Henry, I owe you more than an apology. I was awful. I made terrible assumptions about you, about your life, about your worth. I was cruel when I should have been kind. You were. And now you understand something you should have understood from the beginning. What's that? That Michael's character, his kindness, his integrity, his strength, he didn't get that from nowhere. He learned it. He learned it from me. Cassandra nodded, tears welling in her eyes. He was a good man. He was. And you were a good wife to him in your way. I believe that. But you were not a good daughter to me. I'm trying to learn from this, she whispered. I hope you do. I found a job in Cincinnati, a fresh start. I wish you well, Cassandra, truly. She turned to leave, then paused. Henry, can I ask you one last thing? Of course. If I had been different, if I had come to you with respect from the beginning, would things have been different? I thought about it. I thought about the loneliness after Helen died, the hollow space Michael had tried to fill. I thought about the family they could have been. Yes, he said honestly, they would have been. I would have helped you. We could have been a family, Cassandra. We could have honored Michael together. The truth of that lost opportunity hung between them, more painful than any legal defeat. I see, she said softly. I guess respect really isn't negotiable, is it? No, it's not. After her car disappeared down Sycamore Lane, Henry carried the box inside. He placed the photo album on the coffee table and hung Michael's old baseball glove on a hook in his old room. He was restoring the narrative, piece by piece. The past 3 months had been a crucible. He had learned that quiet strength is not passive. It is stored potential, a coiled spring. He had learned that boundaries are not walls to keep people out, but the foundations upon which healthy relationships are built. And he had learned that the most powerful response to disrespect is not always a shout. Sometimes it is the simple, unassailable truth delivered calmly and with finality. Michael would have been proud. Helen would have approved. And Henry Pendleton, the quiet man, was finally at peace in the home he had built, surrounded by the memories he had protected, his dignity not just restored, but reforged in fire, stronger than ever.